Hi, this is Brent Swallow here again, instructor for AREC 173, Plate, Planet, and Society. Kicking off lectures for the week of September 21st, 25th on Module 3. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. There are two parts. This part one will probably take us through this week, and then part two will be in mostly in next week. Let's look at the goals we laid out in the syllabus for Module 3. So this is called Local Food Contexts, Food Security, Food Geography, and Indigenous Food Cultures. This is the objectives from the syllabus, which you can read. So we're trying to using these cases from Canada and Alberta to analyze things like food insecurity, right to food, the geographic or spatial nature of food systems, kind of what's going on with globalization simultaneous with localization of food systems, and kind of the policy context and policy challenges. So I'm going to provide in these lectures some information about food policy in Canada, food insecurity in Canada, the prevalence and reactions to food deserts. I'm going to reiterate some concepts that we raised in the second module, things like food rights, and then some additional concepts like food deserts, food swamps, what do we mean by local food, some kind of concepts around local food like defensive localism, local trap, and then probably end off with indigenous food cultures. And then, especially in the second week, I'm going to be giving you kind of a few analytical tools about looking at the economics, ethics, and environmental analysis of local food systems. So one concept we'll be looking at next week is the idea of life cycle analysis. Just do this, turn this to slideshow. So the outline then for this week is this focus on the Canadian context. And then the next part will be focusing on kind of the local context. So a reminder from our module 2, we're thinking about ethics of food and food security. Is food as a right? So we have rights. These are guarantees made by collectives, which regarding kind of liberties or expectations that individuals within that society have. Food has been recognized as a right from the UN Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948. And when it was stated that everybody has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and the health and well-being of himself, note the masculine here, and of his family, including food. So what does that mean? Here's one particular concept of what that means in terms of the duty. What's the duty that goes with that right? Do governments have the duty to feed their citizens? So this is one take on this Canada Without Poverty, is that governments have the obligation to allow people to feed themselves as part of living a dignified life. So to not get in the way of people feeding themselves, which is quite different than having the duty to feed people. How has that played out in different other places? There are at least 4 countries here I've listed who have the right to food embedded in their constitutions. India, South Africa, Mexico, all kind of middle-income countries that have the right to food embedded in their constitutions, and then programs that they have put in place to kind of live up to that right. So India has a very elaborate system of midday meals in schools, subsidized food for poor people, food for young children in village-level centers. South Africa also has a right to food in its constitution, and the way it guarantees that right to food is mostly through cash transfers to needy people. Mexico has a project to guarantee to fulfill their right, people's right to food. They have their strategic project for food insecurity, which focuses on extremely poor rural areas. So this is kind of programs which say that recognize some people in society have trouble fulfilling meeting their own food needs from their own resources, and so may need some help. Mexico's is relatively recent, just since 2011 they had this in their constitution. Two places that have programs of food security programs without having the right to food embedded in their constitution is the United States and Ethiopia. The United States actually has a massive program costing something like $71 billion a year in 2016, supporting about 44 million people, although food is not recognized as right. So that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Canada, sorry, let me just finish this off before I talk about Canada. So we have these situations where you have recognized food as a right in constitutions, there are big programs. Does that actually translate into people having adequate food or into food security? In India, for example, despite their big program, 15% of all people are undernourished, so they don't have enough caloric intake. So these are pre-COVID numbers. About 38% of children are stunted, which is an indicator of chronic undernutrition. 21% of children are wasted, so this is an acute undernourishment. So right now they're not receiving adequate nutrition. 54% of pregnant women are anemic, so not having sufficient iron in their diets, likely as one part of anemia. Almost 2/3 of people are vitamin A deficient. And there are long-term trends in India, which is sort of an enigma, of rising incomes yet stubbornly high levels of malnutrition, as indicated by these numbers. In India, COVID-19, there was a relative stability of prices for staple grains where people meet their caloric needs, which is good. So the relative amount of undernourishment probably hasn't increased much. While the prices of pulses and vegetables and fruit and eggs, all nutrient-dense foods, increased significantly. So that means that while during COVID-19, prices didn't skyrocket, pushing people out that way. Some people may have had trouble getting food because of lack of income, but not mostly because of rise of price, where with all of the high nutrient-dense foods, their prices went up, which means that people generally in India have had a worse diet during COVID-19. In Canada, moving to Canada, there is no explicit mention of the right to food either in the Constitution from 1867 or in our more recent Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Surprisingly, for a country as developed and high income as Canada, there is significant problems of food insecurity, which prompted a UN special rapporteur. So the special rapporteur to Kofi Annan, who was then Secretary General of the United Nations, the special rapporteur came to Canada on a right to food mission during the days of Stephen Harper as Prime Minister, was highly critical of Canada for not having right to food, and especially for the precarious situation of Aboriginal people and people living in northern communities regarding their food security. Surprisingly, Canada, not only did we not have a right to food, we also didn't have an explicit food policy until very, very recently, 2019. Food policy up until 2019 was really only implicitly linked to the health policies, to our agriculture policies, and to our trade policies. So what is the policy as of 2019? So this was under the current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, this was his mandate letter to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food in 2015, which was that the minister should oversee the development of a food policy that promotes healthy living and safe food by putting more healthy, more high quality food produced by Canadian ranchers and farmers on the tables of countries across the country. So you can see that this food policy has a health dimension, has a food safety dimension, has a nutrition dimension, and a health dimension. In 2019, then, this was the announcement, so that was 4 years later after quite a bit of consultation, is that all people in Canada are able to access a sufficient amount of safe, nutritious, and culturally diverse food. Canada's food system is resilient and innovative, sustains our environment, and supports our economy. So this, again, is quite a bit beyond just nutrition, enough food. The food should be nutritious, it should be safe, it should be culturally diverse. So we can think about what that means. It also, on the production system, it should be sustainable and it should be an important part of the economy and it should be kind of at the forefront of development. So this is kind of a major achievement for Canada to finally have a food policy that we can evaluate our progress against. That budget, there wasn't really a big match in the budget in 2019 relative to the ambition of that policy. What the 2019 budget did was commit $134 million for creating an advisory council, for a local infrastructure fund that might support things like farmers markets in local areas, promotion of a Buy Canada brand, a Canada brand and a Buy Canada promotion, some support for community projects, especially in northern isolated communities, some support the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to crack down on food fraud that we'll talk about a bit later, and the first steps toward a national school food program. So we now have a vision for what a food policy in Canada might be, then putting the resources behind that and moving that forward is the next challenge. And this was a step in 2019. Of course, everything has changed with COVID-19 in 2020. So it'll be interesting to see with the new budget, which is being announced in a few days, whether we see mention of this. So I'm just going to stop there for this mini lecture and then take a break and then come back to you. So let me stop sharing, stop recording.